This is the Reluctantly Independent podcast, and this is my chat with Jason Prall, founder of the Human Longevity Project. So, could you talk a little bit about your background and what it was that led you to create the Human Longevity Project?
It's kind of a long story to get to the Human Longevity Project. At the end of the day, I was a mechanical engineer when I started, and did that for about 10 years out of college. And, for me, it was a career that I was just not passionate about. I was fairly decent at it, but because I had no drive, I had no desire to get to be good or to put myself into it, it was just sort of mechanical. I just kind of just went with it. And eventually, that it got to a point where I recognized I had to make a shift. And, along the way, with my just chronic health issues that I had, which were fairly benign, fairly surface level, some joint pains and skin issues, but nevertheless, doctors weren't able to help me resolve them very well. And so I was sort of forced to face it myself and figure out what was going on. So, in that process of picking up knowledge and understanding in resolving my own health challenges, when I hit that breaking point for my engineering career, I kind of made the switch over to helping others with their health challenges. And that was something I was a little bit more passionate about. And the nice part is for me, it was using the same skills, which is systems thinking, and solving complex problems, right? That's really what I was good at. So the health world really suited me well, and I had a natural curiosity for it and a natural drive to help people, right? So that's kind of what led down that path. And then eventually, after doing that for quite a while, working with people that had severe chronic issues, autoimmune diseases, cancers, hormonal imbalances, digestive symptoms, you name it, I got to an understanding that no matter how good at resolving the chronic disease you get, there's still a fundamental lack of understanding when it comes to how do we get people healthy? Where does health come from, and what is it that contributes to health? Because to me, that became more of a piece that was missing from most people's lives, is they haven't been given the tool set to become healthy. And so that's really what sort of birthed the Human Longevity Project, is an effort to educate a mass of population with the things that I kept teaching in practice, right? I kept teaching the same things because there's sort of this universal aspect to health that we need to sort of bring back and teach people. And so that's kind of what we did with the Human Longevity Project, just through the lens of longevity and the people that are healthy around the world.
Were you self-taught in terms of health and longevity, or was there any added schooling involved?
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's all self-taught to me. Even in school, right? You can go through the motions in school and get degrees and all these things, but to some degree, the level at which you become proficient at anything is up to you. So, but to answer your question, there was no formal schooling. I had a couple certification courses that I took, and but for me, I actually weaseled my way into some pretty high level lectures that I wasn't necessarily qualified to be in, and I kind of weaseled my way in. And so for me, it was always trying to find the best info, and whether that was on YouTube, whether that was in a research paper, or joining some clinical research study discussion, whatever it was, I was always trying to find the people who could add to my understanding. And so it was all self-taught, but today you can learn anything on the internet. You just got to figure out how to think about it. And to me, that became the key, because there's lots of people taking all kinds of courses and getting all kinds of degrees, but they're missing either the philosophy or the principles through which to find the real answers. And so to me, that became the skill. The skill became, how do I understand what to take with me and what to leave behind? And it's an evolving process, it's something that you layer, and there's you kind of peel back and you adjust and you change and you contradict what you said a year ago. And so it's a constantly evolving thing. But hopefully with the study and the practice, you start to navigate those waters pretty well.
In terms of the health issues that you were dealing with, and the changes that you made to your lifestyle afterwards, did you find it challenging to determine which changes were actually the ones that were most beneficial?
Yeah, it's impossible. I mean, it's quite impossible, and this is an important understanding. There's one of my favorite quotes is everything affects everything, right? And you can't take that lightly. Everybody, it's easy, and I think the starting point for most people is to look for the silver bullet. There's something I'm missing. I just got to find the one thing that's going to solve my problem. I just haven't found it yet, whether it's that supplement or that protocol or this course or whatever it is. They're looking for that thing that's going to solve their problem. And at the end of the day, let me give you this example. Okay, you're $20,000 in debt. Okay, and your goal is to get out of debt and into the positive, to have cash in the bank. And I give you $10,000, and then somebody gives you $3,000, and et cetera, right? And through all this accumulation of new money you've come across, you're now to a point where you're only $20 in debt. You're almost there, but you're still in debt. Right? You're still not where you want to go. You're still in the negative. And then somebody comes along and gives you $50. Now you're in the positive. And is it correct to say that the $50 was the solution to you getting out of debt? Well, of course not. That's ridiculous, right? It was all the things along the way. Perhaps most importantly, one could argue that going from 20,000 to 10,000 was the biggest step you ever made, but yet you were still 10,000 in debt. So it's very impossible to figure out what it is that is the thing that's contributing the most. I think for an individual, we often don't know where that is. And oftentimes it's compounding. 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 2 in the body. 1 plus 1 can equal 50. 1 plus 1 can equal 1,000. So it's a combination of things usually. But generally, over time, working with a number of people, I ended up finding that there were often a number of things that were showing up over and over again, right? Namely, I would say trauma is probably one of the biggest things that shows up time and time again. And this usually comes from childhood, but it can be in adulthood too. And it can even be inherited, which gets even kind of a weirder concept, but science is showing us that that's the case too. So trauma is often a big one. Lifestyle is a very complex and overarching concept, but it's the things that we're doing day in and day out, and the best way to think about lifestyle is think about what the harmonious way that you can interact with the natural rhythms, right? The natural cycles, the natural ways. So, if you were going camping, for example, that would instantly put you in alignment with a lot of things that you're not in alignment with in your normal everyday life, right? So just thinking about those type of things are probably some of the biggest. Circadian rhythm, which is this idea that your body clock is synchronized with the solar cycle in your area, and we all know what circadian rhythm is, because if you've ever traveled 3 or 4 time zones away and you feel jet lag, your circadian rhythm's out of alignment with the local time zone. So we instantly know what that is, right? So this is a common problem that I see today because of all the artificial lighting, cell phones, computers, TVs, et cetera, that we're watching at night, and our lack of getting outside and getting natural daylight. So there's common things, and I think mostly I would say that it's not necessarily the food as much as people think. In other words, when you become really healthy, the food, every one of us knows that person who can eat pizza, drink beer, have McDonald's, eat candy bars, and you're like, how the heck are you not sick and you're like relatively in shape? And I don't get it, but yet I even look at a bagel and I start getting a rash, right? So the thing that we have to recognize is that it's not as much the food as we think it is. And believe me, I'm a staunch advocate of organic, local, real food grown in soil that is healthy, hopefully in season, right? So I'm very much a believer in this, and I think it's a big problem societally that we have to correct. But we cannot be myopic in our focus on that. So there's a number of things that work into this factor, but I would say that the biggest thing that we're missing is the emotional traumas, the way we think and the way we emote. Those things need to be brought back into the equation in a much stronger way. And I know why they're not being focused on, and it's because we can't test for them. It's hard to identify them. You can't sort of put your finger on a lot of it. But I can tell you that I've had enough clients that I can tell just by talking to them that there's trauma somewhere in their childhood, or when I get an email and I can see the wording and the language that's being used, and I can feel that there's something going on deeper, right? It's a sense of fear, a sense of apprehension, a sense of distrust, a sense of, there's all these sort of personality traits that kind of bubble up, and you can, with the practice and just enough cases, you can sort of see this thing from a mile away. So it's a lot of things that coalesce and come together to create any issue, whether it's a skin issue, a joint pain like I had, whether it's cancer, or whether it's autoimmune disease. There's a lot of things working together in synergy to create an imbalance in the body, and we just have to recognize that that's all it is. It's an imbalance. It is not something that is inherently wrong with you. It's just an imbalance, and oftentimes it's not even an imbalance in the body. The body's just where it's showing up for you. So we have to recognize there's many layers. They all come together, and not to be myopic and so focused on trying to find that one solution that's going to fix us.
In terms of the documentary, it's my understanding that it was originally going to be like a short movie documentary, and I'm wondering what led you to extend it to an entire 9-part series.
Well, there's a lot of things, but primarily it was because we just realized there was too much to cover. It was very difficult to be. And I come from an engineering world. When we wrote things in engineering, the whole point was to be concise, right? Say as much as you can in as little words as possible. So I'm a very big advocate of being concise in a message, but there's just so much there that it was hard to distill down into 60 or 90 minutes. And so we just thought that we'd like to expand the discussion on a number of topics because there was so much, right? We have circadian rhythm, we have birthing, we have traumas, we have connection and meaning and these type of things. We've got circadian rhythm and temperature fluctuations and diet and mitochondria and microbiota, and there's just the philosophy of health and longevity. I mean, that's a big one in and of itself. So there's just a lot of things to cover that we needed that much time.
And in the documentary, you visited blue zones. So I was wondering if you could just explain the concept of blue zones a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the blue zones is kind of an interesting one. So it started off with a guy named Michel Poulain, who is a Belgian demographer, and I believe it was the year 2000. He wrote a scientific paper sort of describing there was this odd place in the mountains of Sardinia, which is an island off of Italy. And he recognized that there was sort of this anomaly where there was a number of people that were living into their 100s at a statistically improbable rate. That there was a statistical anomaly to this. There was such a concentration of centenarians, of people that were 100 years old. And so he wrote a scientific paper about that and said, hey, there's something here, something special. We don't know what it is yet, but this is odd, and we should look into this, right? And so he sort of got dismissed by the scientific community for a while and said there was nothing really there for people to look at because it's sort of demography, right? It's sort of just population studies. Nobody really cares. There's not a lot of money in that, so it probably got dismissed fairly readily. And then I believe, if this is, and I think I have the story correct, but I may be wrong. But Dan Buettner and National Geographic were somehow got in touch with Michel Poulain, and they kind of partnered and wanted to sort of write a story about this. They thought they could bring this to the world through media and journalism, and so. Michel was looking for other places that and if I remember correctly, Michel was the first one to sort of circle that area in Sardinia and color it in a blue pencil. That was a story that he told me. And so he sort of coined the term blue zone just as sort of this, way to describe this. And then when National Geographic and Michel sort of partnered up and Michel looked for other places, he found that there was a couple other places around the world that matched the same criteria. Sardinia was the first. Ikaria, Greece, which is an island in the eastern part of Greece, and that became sort of the next blue zone, I believe, or maybe it was Okinawa. But Okinawa is also a blue zone, and then the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica was termed a blue zone, and then Loma Linda, California, was also termed a blue zone. Now. The thing is, blue zone is a trademark name. It's sort of coined and it's sort of been given these descriptions. To me, I don't really care about that. That's not my area of study. I don't care about blue zones one way or the other, because to me, the concentration of the population of 100-year-olds is not important to me. It's not really the factor. And I think the reason that there is a concentration in these places is because isn't it odd that they're mostly islands, right? You have Okinawa, which is an island. You have Ikaria, Greece, which is an island. You have Sardinia, which is an island, and Nicoya Peninsula, which is a peninsula, but it's sort of separated. If you go there, you'll kind of see that you're sort of off in no man's land. And I think the reason that they're all islands is because the culture has been preserved. Even the genetics have been preserved. So there's this sort of homogenous way of life that has been preserved, and it's a healthy way of life, and it's been preserved for a long period of time. That's avoided industrialization. So to me, that's the secret of the quote unquote blue zones, if you will. But I want to know what the secret of longevity was. How can, because look, I mean, I'm in San Diego, California, right? And this will never be a blue zone in my mind, not in any time soon anyway. And so do I care if the area is a blue zone? Or do I care if I'm healthy living into my 80s, 90s, and 100s? That's what I care about. So how can the individual be healthy as we grow older? And so that was really what was my focus, was not necessarily these blue zones. And in fact, after talking to Michelle, he seems to think that the characteristics that made Okinawa a blue zone are now fading away, that the statistics are changing such that, it's not anything special anymore. Now, it's still a blue zone. So like I said, that's trademarked. So that's a whole different thing. But the statistics are now changing. And same thing is happening in Costa Rica. And this is because industrialization is coming in. This is because the things are changing, right? So this idea of the culture being preserved and the genetics being preserved has now been lost. It's now starting to get lost. So to me, that's why I don't care about blue zone studies. I care about what is contributing to longevity. And actually, more importantly, I care about what is contributing to health as we age. Because making it to 100 is sort of out of your control, right? I mean, I could walk out of this room right now and get hit by a bus. And, that's just the way it goes, right? So to some degree, we can't focus on this idea of longevity. All we can do is focus on how we can be healthy and happy today, and hopefully do the things today that will contribute to a healthier future.
Okay, so based on some of the stories that you heard from the people that you spoke with, what were some of the most common lifestyle choices that you found from them?
Well, I think here's the thing. We have to remember, and this is probably what's not highlighted enough for anybody that's familiar with sort of the blue zones work and the study of these areas. I think it's not highlighted enough that the fact that they grew up in a different era. I mean, completely different era. If you're talking to somebody today that's 100 years old, that means they were born in 1918. 1918 in Ikaria, Greece, an island in Greece. So they didn't have electricity for most of their life until the 60s or 70s. So they lived 50 plus years without electricity. That means they were birthed without electricity. They didn't have refrigeration. They didn't have, transportation other than walking for the most part. Look, they lived a different life. And even today, they're living a little bit different life. But they were forced to go with the rhythms of nature, right? So if it's summer, then they behave one way. If it's winter, they behave another way. If it's the rainy season, they behave another way. So they are sort of forced to go with the flow that nature provides. This means food, same thing. They are going with the flow of nature from a food perspective. So they operate with nature, not against it, right? And I grew up in Seattle. I mean, I remember eating mangoes in January. It's like, I mean, we can get into the scientific discussion about that, but at the end of the day, I can tell you one thing for certain, that it's not operating with the cycles of nature in that area, right? We spend most of our time inside. We have lights on after it's dark. So right now, if you look at us, we are so off of the flow of nature. And people recognize this. This is the reason that people are sort of doing these digital detox retreats. This is why, you see people just trying to get out in nature and go camping. I mean, there's always been this draw to get out into nature and sort of be more natural, right? It's because we're so blessed with convenience and an easy life that we kind of want to get back to our roots a little bit, I think. So they have a different life in the way they operate. They also are in villages, which means that they kind of operate like a little family or a tight-knit community or church or a soccer team or whatever. They're all working together. So the relationships are different, right? You can't, it actually is a detriment to you if you don't have good relationships with those around you. If you aren't able to work through any issues or be open and honest and an absence of jealousy and envy and all these things, right? I mean, all these sort of positive traits serve you well. They actually are beneficial for survival. And so they learn to cooperate, to work together, to partner, to sort of have a very equal and just and fair sort of agrarian society. So they lived in a different way. Now, that's great, and there's some things that we can take from that. But at the end of the day, we can't take that lifestyle and supplant it here in most of the West, because we're too far beyond that, and so we have to find ways to take the benefits of that type of thing and somehow try to infuse it with our modern lifestyles. And I think technology can assist in some of this stuff, but you find that they work together. They operate by the natural rhythms of nature. They are outside a lot. They move a ton. I mean, like all day. They'll walk 30, 40 kilometers to go to work. I mean, these guys moved. They did not live an easy life. They ate food in a natural way. And what I mean by that is that they would not overeat, because why would you overeat if you're the one producing the food? It's kind of silly, right? So they don't overeat. They eat in natural windows. They have great cooperation and meaning and connection in their lives, and they don't overthink or overstress about little things. So it's a very simple life that they lived, but they also, because of the simplicity and because of sort of the challenge, if you will, they appreciated everything, right? Going to get water, or a successful birth, or the food that's grown. I mean, they're grateful for every little thing. So I think we just have to sort of recognize that they're so different in that, and then we have to try to take some of those qualities and those benefits and bring them back into our life here in a modern way.
So in the documentary, you discussed the prevalence of toxins in our environment and their effects on stuff like the microbiome.
Yeah.
You mentioned substances like glyphosate, found in pesticides like Roundup. And I'm wondering what steps you feel need to be taken to deal with toxins like these, and if you think like the responsibility falls mostly on the individual, or is it something that governments and industry should be most responsible for?
Yeah, I mean, I would love if government and industry would step in, but the reality is that government and industry only respond to the will of the people. They don't lead, they follow, right? This is what we have to recognize as a population, is that organic food was not mandated by the U.S., but yet organic food movement has grown in a tremendous way, right? We see that GMOs, there's a tremendous drive in the U.S. to either ban or label GMOs, and yet the government has not really stepped in to sort of initiate anything. And yet you start to see, General Mills and some of these big conglomerates actually marketing GMO-free, right, for like cereals and stuff. So they are responding to the will of the people. If their profits are hurt, they will respond in a way, if they're smart, to what the people want. So we can't look to them for the answers. We have to take it upon ourselves to create the change. And this comes down to the individual. It can come down, and it can be done in a number of ways. I think primarily making good decisions in our everyday lives based on what you want. And I'm not here to tell anybody what they should or shouldn't do. But if they want healthy, I would suggest that eating organic and non-GMO and real whole foods is the way to go. So making those decisions, you play a role in the market, right? And then we of course have the education piece, so writing books and blogs and videos and all the things you see on the internet. I think this has been a big change maker for the industry. And so we have to look towards ourselves to really do that. And I think it's critical to take steps to do this if we want health, not only individual human health, but collective health and environmental health, because these things like glyphosates and some of the other things that they're putting in these pesticides and herbicides and fungicides and rodenticides and all these things that they're doing, I mean, it's destroying the soil. When you destroy the soil, you have less healthy food. When you have less healthy food, you have less healthy humans and less healthy animals. So it destroys the whole food chain when you start to disrupt the soil. And it's exactly what these these things do. So we have to restore some of this stuff if we want health, robust health across the ecosystem. And some of the things that we can do to sort of mitigate or remove some of these things from ourselves as an individual, I think the easiest way is to start to not consume them, right? Do whatever you can to avoid them. And this is a lot easier than I think people realize. But the organic foods, it's definitely better to go organic. Now, organic even has its problems because labeling issues, what we term organic doesn't mean that there's no pesticides, unfortunately. And even if there is no intentional pesticides, this stuff is everywhere. So there's inherent problems, but I think going to organic and non-GMO is a critical step. And if you're able to, which I think most people can, they just don't have the confidence to do so, but to grow your own food. And this can be small. If you never were raised to grow food and you're not sure how to do it and start, I mean, it's really not that hard. And you can start very simply. You can get a planter box and just start growing a few things. Carrots are the easiest thing in the world to grow. You throw some seeds down at the right time, put some water on it, and voila. I mean, a couple of weeks later, you got some carrots. It's not rocket science, right? So some of this stuff is pretty easy, and it's actually kind of fun, especially if you have kids. It gives you something to do. It gives you something to focus on. It gives you something to appreciate, and you have some organic food that you know where it's coming from, and you know what the soil quality is. So, things like that is a really good step. Exercising, just any kind of movement is a very good thing for detoxification and getting things moving. Drinking clean water, which is getting more and more difficult, I think is important. Saunas, a very good way to sweat out a lot of the toxins. You can even sweat out metals with sweating, with saunas and that kind of thing. So I think those are some simple steps, but eating real, whole, organic fruits and vegetables is probably one of the most beneficial ways to clean out the system and improve the health of the system such that detoxification becomes easier. Amino acids are important too. So if you do eat meat and that kind of thing, eating meat and eggs, good clean meat and eggs and that type of thing is very good. If you don't eat meat, then making sure you're getting some quality amino acid sources in there because that helps detoxification too. So again, remember, everything affects everything. So even good thoughts and good emotion improve detoxification because you can get, something like meditation can help you get rid of toxins because you're now shifting your nervous system into a state of parasympathetic, this rest and digest, this ability to clean up the body and repair the body. So meditation can improve detoxification, right? So we have to remember that all the things that contribute to health, they improve every part of the system. Whether it's detoxification, whether it's mood and behavior, whether it's the microbiota, whether it's the mitochondria, whether it's, repair, muscle building, all this stuff, it's all tied together. So the focus should be on what can I do that it's healthy and how can I do more of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I noticed there was nothing too excessive in terms of the lifestyle choices of the people that you spoke with. None of them were on what you would consider very strict diets or anything like that. But that being said, what are your thoughts on the choices of people who do go to rather excessive lengths to promote longevity through stuff like extreme supplementation and biohacking and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not necessary, and I don't think that. I know that because, you can look at a lot of people around the world and they don't do that. So it's not necessary. Now, can it be beneficial based on the poor environment and the poor lifestyle that we're living? Sure, you can use some of those things to offset or combat poor environment or poor lifestyle choices. But the other way to do it is just to improve the environment that you're in and improve the lifestyle choices you're making. So, I'm not going to say one way or the other what's right or what's wrong. I think if you enjoy some of the biohacking and that kind of thing, and it's something that brings you true enjoyment and fun and meaning and all that kind of stuff, then great, go for it. I would argue, though, that the more we choose things that nature doesn't naturally provide, the more likely it is that they could have a harmful effect, right? Either acutely or chronically. So a good example of this is like an infrared sauna, right? I love infrared saunas. I'm a big advocate for that. But we do know that nature does not provide infrared light in these sort of banded spectrums like a sauna does, like an infrared sauna does. Whereas if you go to a Swedish sauna, that's actually more, it's mimicking nature a lot more, because it's using sort of natural rocks and minerals to emit this heat or this infrared light in a array of spectrums. So, I mean, just that's a simple example of something that's very similar, but one that's going to be more toward the likes of nature, and one that's a little more man-made. And I would argue that the Swedish sauna is probably one of the things that's a little bit more healthy. And we, just because we don't know why and we don't have the science, doesn't necessarily negate the fact that it's probably true. And I think if you're arguing against things that, if you're arguing for things that are against nature, I think you're going to have a hard time bearing that truth, because nature's kind of figured out the best way that we know. And, so I think you just have to be careful. Supplementation is very tricky. And I know this because I use it in practice all the time. And what I recognized over time is that you don't know how much to give, what to give, when to give it, and when to stop. The body is so dynamic, and we just don't know these things yet. The studies are so inadequate to help us understand this stuff. The next best thing would be experience, just sort of trial and error and experience what has worked for many people. But every person that comes into your door, they're going to need something different. And so you can't, it doesn't even fully apply. You can just sort of use it as a best guess. What I ended up going toward is using sort of energy testing and muscle testing, and that seemed to be a little bit better. But even then, the body's so dynamic, it's changing every second, right? I mean, your state in the morning is different than the state at night. The next day is going to be different than the state today. So it's a tricky thing that you're literally just rolling the dice with supplements. Now, some of them have less harmful effects or less potential for harm. Some of them have more potential for harm. So using, better judgment in supplementation is a very good thing. But, I just find it kind of odd when people look at the science and say, okay, well, let's just say, nicotinamide riboside we know that this is good for mitochondria and longevity. Let's go ahead and just dose that and just keep using it. And let's think that that's healthy. I think what we're probably getting more of is the placebo effect than anything else. So I think to me, the placebo effect is probably the biggest benefit of any supplementation.
I'm wondering what led you to choose the particular experts that you spoke with for the documentary. I noticed a trend in terms of functional medicine practitioners and health educators, perhaps over traditional Western medicine practitioners.
Yeah, I mean, we had to, the thing is we wanted to explain health, right? So we wanted to explain two things: what health is, where it comes from, and how it's manifesting in the body. And the other part of it is we want to explain chronic disease, what things are leading to chronic disease and what's happening. So neither of those two sort of concepts or frameworks lends itself to traditional Western medicine. Western medicine is terrible at chronic disease. They know nothing about chronic disease. All they know is how to label it, and even then they don't label it correctly. So they're just really ill-equipped to even talk about it, let alone deal with it. So we can't. That said, Western medicine is fantastic at acute care. Things like physical traumas and broken bones and these type of things they're fantastic at, right? But they're just so bad at chronic disease that you can't even, it's a non-starter. You can't even start the conversation. So we needed to go towards people that understood things a little bit more deeply, had experience with that side of the equation, so that we could sort of pull out a lot of the in-depth information.
And was there any particular piece of information that you learned from any of the experts that you spoke with that stood out to you the most, or was maybe the most surprising?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. I mean, part of it is that I sort of led the discussion, so I was sort of leading the conversation a little bit. So a lot of it was sort of I understood, but there's so many details, so much nuance, and so many personal experiences that were fantastic to hear, right? That I wasn't sort of expecting or necessarily knew. Just to give you an example, I'll give you a couple easy ones and a couple kind of cool stories. One was Karan Krishnan, who is a microbiologist. He was talking to me about the benefits of eating kiwi. He said, and this is just an illustration of a point, but also kind of this scientifically verified sort of phenomenon, which is that when you eat a kiwi, it's actually beneficial to eat the whole kiwi, like the peel. Like, don't cut it in half and scoop out the insides. Eat the whole thing. And the peel, it's very fibrous, but it's easy to eat. It's not like a chewy. It's fine. It's almost like an apple. It's like, why would you peel an apple? It's very, very similar to that. But the fiber on the outside of the kiwi actually feeds a specific bacterial species in the gut, and this bacterial species, the healthy one, actually makes up somewhere between 7 and 10% of the total bacteria in the gut, and total microbiota, which is a huge number. That's a big portion. And he said this fibrous, that certain part of the fiber actually feeds that bacteria. And they've noticed in scientific studies that it leads to a reduction in things like colitis and Crohn's disease and intestinal inflammation. So just by eating the whole kiwi instead of doing something weird like scooping out the insides is a beneficial thing for the microbiota that may help something like Crohn's and colitis and those type of things. So that was a fun example. Another good story that I heard was from Dr. Deanna Minnick. And Deanna was talking to me about how when she was younger, she was studying nutrition, and she had some issues with her sort of reproductive organs, right? Fallopian tubes and uterus, I believe, something in the reproductive organs. And she had a mass there, and this was it was noticed in the doctor's office. They did tests on it and found a mass, and she was doing all the things, right? Good diet, exercise, supplements. She was doing all the things. She was meditating, all kinds of things, and couldn't get resolution from it. And she started doing art one day. I think she was painting. She started painting. She was painting all these sort of abstract things and just painting. She just felt like painting. And after weeks, her boyfriend at the time, who's now her husband, said, you're kind of painting your fallopian tubes and your uterus here. And she kind of looked and she's like, huh. So she kept doing these sort of these designs that were very reminiscent of the female organ system. And her husband noticed it, and he's like, and you're always using sort of red and orange and yellow. She's like, huh. She didn't really even know that she was doing it. She was just painting, and whatever was coming out was coming out. And then she went back to the doctor, and the mass was gone. And the doctor said, well, what have you been doing? And she said, I don't remember if she even told the doctor, but she knew that. She said, it was the only thing I was doing different was painting. So for her, expressing herself, and this was probably an emotional thing. So expressing that emotion, getting something out of her through art, through creativity, through this release, or it could have been a sort of meditative sort of explanation where she was sort of in the flow, in the zone, right? In this sort of focused meditative state of art that allowed her body to start healing. It's hard to explain, but at the end of the day, she's 100% convinced that it was the art that led her to her body recovering. Now, of course, art doesn't heal. Art may have been the thing that allowed her body to heal, right? It's always the body that's healing itself. So even with supplements, the supplements are not healing anything. The supplements are allowing the body to heal. So, I think these are the type of stories and things that, kind of came out of just having discussions with some people that were able to think in a little bit different way about health and about disease.
Yeah, it sounds like, finding purpose and meaning in your life can be a really big thing in speeding up the healing process, right? And it sounds like that might have been her situation.
Yeah, here's the thing about purpose. This is a distinction I've sort of recently made, and since doing this documentary, I'm just really starting to move away from the idea of purpose, because purpose seems like it's something external. Purpose seems like it's something that you have to go find or go get and hold on to, attach yourself to this purpose. Right? I'm here for a purpose. I think life has purpose, but I think more importantly, what we should recognize is meaning. Right? Meaning is a decision. Right? Meaning is a choice that you can make if something has meaning or not, right? And I think this is more valuable because what we found in the regions that we went to is that they seem to have meaning all around them, right? Even in just like in Okinawa, we were talking to one gal and she was talking about the ocean and how it's a healing mechanism. That when the tide goes out, it takes away the old. And the tide comes in, it brings in the new, right? That's meaning in the ocean and being amongst it, right? And looking at it. This idea of Shinrin Roku, which is where you walk amongst the forest, right? This forest bathing. There's embedded meaning in that process as a healing mechanism. So it's not like, oh, they're just walking through the forest and that's healing. Yes, that is true, but they actually have a meaning behind it, to where they're even calling it a name, forest bathing. So this idea that when they go into the forest, they're going in there with an intention to heal, to be well. So you see what I'm saying? There's sort of a difference between somebody just walking through the forest and sort of slightly noticing something versus somebody that's going in and going, this is a healing mechanism. I know this is a healing mechanism. I enjoy this, right? So there's sort of this difference, and it's a meaning that's decided by the individual, or perhaps even influenced by the culture. So this is why, if food is placed in front of you, you just start eating, versus food is placed in front of you and you sort of bless it or thank or be grateful for it or pray or whatever. Now you have meaning behind this meal, that it's there to nourish you and that it's a gift and that you're thankful for it, right? So we have to really recognize that we can have meaning in anything big or small. Purpose seems like very difficult. Like when I'm sitting, I don't eat with purpose. I mean, I know that's sort of a phrase, but like I don't eat with purpose. So purpose is kind of a weird one. I don't really like it. I think meaning is a much better way to focus our attention, because it sort of brings us in the here and now, as opposed to something that we're trying to go get later or chase later or hold on to.
So the end of the documentary discusses combining ancient practices with modern technology. And I noticed that you chose pretty subtle technologies like heart rate variability training and sleep tracking and the use of saunas and stuff like that. So I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on what seem to be like the impending use of technologies that are much less subtle, like, gene editing kits and potentially life expanding drugs and stuff like that? How do you think that fits in with kind of
right.
keeping a simple lifestyle and, not being too excessive about things?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, the technology is advancing in ways that we can't even imagine, right? I mean, there's stuff that's happening behind closed doors that we don't even know about yet, right? That's not out in the public. So, I mean, I've no doubt that there's going to be some fabulous technology that's going to be able to do some insanely cool things, and be life-saving and be life-extending and all kinds of great stuff. At the end of the day, though, I mean, those things are probably going to be very expensive and sort of one-off things. I mean, look at stem cell therapy right now. It's fantastically successful, but fairly expensive, and not everybody has access to it. So I think there's that side. Now, with the usable or wearable technologies for the majority of the population, I think there's a few qualifiers that I would advocate for. One is it showing you something about your life, right? That about your lifestyle that you can then use to navigate the world. This is where I like heart rate variability, sleep trackers, like the Aura Ring, these type of things, because something like heart rate variability, you can use that and track your heart rate variability, then go and do a meditation and look at your heart rate variability during the meditation and say, oh, like that really did do stuff, right? Or track your heart rate variability, then eat this really sort of inflammatory meal and say, oh, wow, that really did change my physiology, right? Or eat this food or that food, or do an infrared sauna, or do a workout. It will tell you, are you working out too hard? It'll tell you, are you sleeping well, right? So to me, that's a very valuable tool to recognize, to sort of navigate the lifestyle decisions that we're making. Does this supplement actually help me and change my heart rate variability? Maybe, maybe not, right? So, and then the sleep trackers are great because they show you, if you're getting good restorative sleep, because it's a very hard thing to measure, hard thing to notice without sort of tracking. So I think that's a very valuable tool to help us understand when should we go to bed, and how should we be sleeping, and is it dark enough, and am I eating too close to bedtime, am I working out too hard, am I emotionally a mess, these type of things. It'll help you suss that out. So I think that's very valuable. And then some of the other stuff, like maybe an infrared sauna, that's a tool, and it can be used to accomplish a number of things. It's pretty close to what nature is providing, and it's not the downside effects are minimal. So it's also helping with what I think is a fundamental problem right now, which is toxins. We were just bombarded with toxins, and so to me, it's like whatever we can do to help move that process along, I think is really important.
Mm-hmm. And How do you envision the future of medicine? And is there a difference between how you hope it will turn out and how you think it will actually turn out?
Um, Boy, I think this is going to be a complex one. I think it's really hard to predict the future of medicine. I think there's two sides to that coin. I think one side is that the medical devices and medical technologies will be so advanced that we will be getting into nanotechnology and microbots and these type of things and amazing. Even right now we're using nanotech to deliver molecules inside the cell. So it's going to advance in really amazing ways. I think we're going to still run up against the same philosophical barriers, which is that the body, all it wants to do is balance. And if we're trying to interject and sort of move things around and sort of push one node, we have to recognize that all the other nodes are going to move too, right? It's sort of like if you've got a water balloon and you poke it on the left side, it affects all of the water inside the balloon. It doesn't just affect the left side of the water balloon. So we have to recognize that. I think we're gonna come across that same barrier no matter how good the tech gets. There's always a effect that maybe we don't know yet. So I think that is inevitably coming. I think the other side of it is that you're going to start to see the health and let's say the lifestyle medicine take over and be more democratic, more decentralized, which just means that people are going to be more focused on how they can use tracking devices, apps, and self-care to avoid getting sick. I think this is sort of the big wave of the future because there's so many things in our world right now that are sort of making us sick or contributing to that problem. I think you're going to see it become sort of the main focus of most people's lives is how do I stay healthy? And we're already kind of moving in that direction, but I think it will continue to move in that direction, and it will continue to get more, let's say, natural, more fundamental, by just getting outside, getting your feet on the ground, getting out in the sun, being amongst friends, all these sort of things that we've kind of took a break from, over the last 20, 30 years since technology has developed. I think the next technological wave will be how can we get away from technology, right? It's an ironic thing. It's sort of technology's pulled us away from each other, and I think the next technological wave is how can tech bring us back together and not be so reliant on technology.
And how can people best continue to follow your work?
They can find the film at humanlongevityfilm.com. That's kind of where most of our stuff lives, and we are working on a bunch of content right now, but they can find us on Facebook at the Human Longevity Project. They can find me on social media as well, Jason Prall. And that's kind of where we live.
Cool. And I did notice that at the end of the documentary, you mentioned that you have a plan to help save the lives of mothers and newborns in developing nations by doing things like providing training and portable incubators. So I was wondering how that plan's coming along.
Yeah, it's good. We don't do the work ourselves. We're simply just a donating mechanism. So we do give back to a number of charities that we think are helping in the right way, which is to start where it matters most, which is sort of at birth, right? I think arguably that the most important part of longevity is what happens between preconception and 20 years old, right? That young window is probably the most important to a healthy person's life. So we find that there's just so much unfortunate situations in the birthing world right now, and so there's a lot of help that needs that they need in that area. So that's kind of where we started our focus, is to donate to those causes that are helping improve that situation.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah, I really appreciate it, Jason. It was really enlightening conversation.
No, I appreciate you having me on. Thank you very much.